I was rearranging my shop. Now, when I say shop, that's a combination of my workshop. I've got my saw, my miter saw, my table saw. I've got all my power tools. I've got a workout area. I've got a gravity edge. I've got I guess it's called a Roman stand where I can do push ups and dips and pull ups. I've got a wrestling mat. And for like 20 years, I've had this one corner in my shop where I have my climbing stuff. I built a climbing wall, a couple of 8x4 panels of plywood decorated with those artificial rocks. And in order to build it, I had to open up a section of the ceiling so I could have an inversion. I could have an area where I could climb upside down. And when Lonnie Beth was at home and we worked with her for 6 months as a homeschool student so we could get her reading up to date, we'd gone up into the attic of the shop and had floored the attic and created a little bunk. The cross pieces that come out of the ceiling joist make like a V, and we had put cross braces on those and built some bunks. And she had a little playhouse up there. And she and Joshua and Jordan used to play up there all the time. It's actually too hot to play up there in the summertime, but we had that area. Now, it hadn't been played in 20 years. Maybe the grandkids are old enough now that they'll go up there and use it, but we'll have to see. Anyway, I've taken the climbing wall down, and now that the climbing wall was gone, I was going to move the wrestling mat to the climbing corner, and then I'd have a walk space, and then I could move my workbench, and I could move my toolbox and all the things around, and just basically get a new feel for the garage. And I'm in there moving stuff around. I've got this exposed section of ceiling where I had hung the climbing wall. The back door is open, and the big roll down door is open. And I'm standing there in the garage, and Troy Farmer, my very dear friend, is there, and he's kind of helping me, and we're talking, and we're not really working hard. We're just kind of moving things as we feel like it. And I was standing by the back door because we walked to the back door of the garage, and I was going to show Troy the little thing I'd built to shoot into. We live out in the country. My neighbors are very tolerant of me. And I had an old utility pole that I had cut up into sections. And then I put some T-post in the ground and stacked those poles up so I'd have a big backdrop to shoot into. Well, we're standing by the back door of the garage. As we're standing by the back door of the garage, looking out into the yard, I heard something. And it was a scrabbling, scrambling, scurrying noise. It sounded like something with multiple legs. Really, it sounded like a dust devil, like a burst of wind had gotten into the attic and was blowing leaves around and then bouncing acorns at the same time. What my mind pictured was this giant centipede from the King Kong movie. Then the next thought I had was this is what the serpent in the garden sounded like before it lost its legs. This scrabbling, moving, slithering kind of thing. Troy and I said at the same time, did you hear that? And I did. I had. And I listened, and I heard it again. We began to ease back into the building, and we stopped, and the scrambling demon noise happened again. I grabbed a broom handle and poked the ceiling. Nothing happened. We moved back onto the climate area, and we heard it again. That was in the wall. Look, I'd just been up there 2 weeks ago. I looked at the little play area we'd made. There were no nests. There's no leaves up there. There's no holes for invaders to get into. We moved to the front door, and you could hear it above the garage door as it was rolled up. I grabbed a ladder. Troy grabbed the ever-present Kimber 1911 that he carries, one of only 2 pistols in the world with the descending spider logo on the grips. I got the ladder and I propped it up, and I said, I've got to go inside. Years ago, my brother had given me a really primitive hand loading kit, and I'd made a set of 357 shells that only fired the primer. There's no powder, and the primer was the only thing that would fire. And I had loaded some rubber bullets onto them. So I made this set of varmint loads so that if Jackie ever needed to shoot something on the porch, or that if there was something, she needed to run out of the yard and didn't want to kill it, she could fire this primer and hit it with a rubber bullet. And so I said, I'm going to go into the house. and I'm going to get the rubber bullets, and I'm going to go up into the attic. And then if I'm in the attic and I get in trouble, Troy's standing in there with the 45. So we're all good to go. And so we stepped out of the garage, just about to go into the house to get my Magnum, and I heard the sound again. And now it wasn't like it was in the attic. It was like just outside with us. And it was all around us, and it was louder than the cicadas. And it's not like you could hear it like this. This was around us. I mean, right next to us. And it wasn't cicadas. Maybe this was the mother of all the cicadas. And I was going to get to kill it. But as we're standing there looking around, trying to find the source of this noise, Troy says, hey, you might want to check your back pocket. And I pull my phone out of my back pocket, and my phone was playing a video. It was the video that I had recorded of marble-sized hail falling on the deck Wednesday night. In this video of the marble-sized hail bouncing and rolling and scrabbling around my deck was randomly playing in my back pocket. Somehow I was pocket dialing, but instead of making a phone call, it was accessing my videos. I had just butt dialed myself and was playing a recording of hail falling. The butt dial from Hail, Hail. No wonder the thing was following us. It was in my pocket. No wonder that no matter where I stood, no matter where I went, we could hear it. The reason this noise, this frightening thing was with us was I was carrying it around. Some weird acoustical phenomenon made it sound like it was in the wall. It made it sound like it was above us. It made it sound like it was behind us. It made it sound like it was in the attic. But in truth, there were no creatures in the attic. They were just in our imagination. In my imagination, it had multiple legs and pointed spiky feet, and Troy thought it sounded like something that was wounded and could only use 2 of its feet and was dragging itself across the rafters and around the floor of the attic. It was more amusing than it was embarrassing, but at least Troy was convinced that there was something in the attic that needed killing too. The noise I heard was merely the sound of an event that I had recorded. The noise I heard was merely the sound of an event that I had recorded, and not only recorded, but I had saved. And yet when that event was replayed, and it was replayed out of context without proper understanding, it was totally misinterpreted. We record, we remember, we save, and we carry things around with us. And when those things are played back and we are left to interpret them, they often sound threatening, they often sound scary, and sometimes all they do is serve to confuse us. You see, once the source of the sound was identified, not only was it benign, it ended up being downright silly. We stood in the garage and laughed for a long time that we were about to go straight up Ghostbusters into my attic looking for the giant centipede. And there wasn't anything up there. It was in my pocket. And the sound wasn't the sound of a creature. It was the sound of a hailstorm. I've been guilty of this. I've carried some things around from time to time. And while I was carrying them, when they were replayed, especially if I was in a vulnerable place, those things took on a very different character. They got misinterpreted, they got magnified, they got mutated into something that sounded more threatening than it really was. Was I betrayed? Was I misinterpreted? Was I lied to? Was I lied about? Was I treated with disdain and contempt? Yeah. But it wasn't happening at the moment. I was responding to something that had occurred in the past and had let it replay itself in another situation. You see, if I don't keep a recording of those things in my back pocket, I can't project them into my attic. Now, it's very easy to let bad people or simply just normal, flawed people who've done regrettable acts into our headspace. It's real easy to let them live up there rent-free. It's real easy for those sounds to stay in our heads. They really shouldn't be in our heads. They should be in our pocket, and maybe they shouldn't even be in our pockets. But see, we keep that record. We keep that record on us, and it takes residence, and it's rent-free in our attic. And it crawls around up there making scary noises at inappropriate times, and we react to it by feeling confused and scared ourselves. Now, the solution to this is simple, but it's not easy. You just simply decide that you're going to take that regrettable event, you're going to take that noise that you've carried around with you, and you're simply going to delete it. You're just going to erase and delete the recording and stop carrying it with you, and then it won't replay. You won't hear it again, and you won't misinterpret it or superimpose it, superimpose something from the back porch on a Wednesday to the attic on a Saturday afternoon. And I get it. There are some things, and you can't delete them. There's some things that are there, and they're hard recorded, they're imprinted, but you can turn the volume down, or you can take it out of your pocket and leave it somewhere so it doesn't follow you everywhere you go, or you can pull it out of your pocket when you're in a calm, safe place and you're clear-headed and not confused and vulnerable, and you just play it again. And you can listen to it carefully, and you can watch it carefully. And you can realize, it sounds like this, but it's really that. It sounded like this today, but what it really was this yesterday. John Gottman has this thing when he talks about when couples argue, that one of the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse is the presence or absence of contempt. And really, it really boils down to when I say something to you and I'm unhappy about something, or I've got a complaint, do I offer those suggestions? Do I say those things? And do I use contempt? And most of the time when I do a seminar, and even in marriage counseling, when I talk to people, I usually put the responsibility on the speaker. I've got to say things, and I've got to word those things, and I've got to form those things as a positive request to have my needs met. The example I often use is, if Jackie were unhappy with my hunting, she could say, "You're never home," or she could say, "I wished we spent more time together." You see, if I'm unhappy that you're gone all the time and I say, "You're never home," that starts a confrontation rather than starting a conversation. But if I were to say and make a request to have my needs met, "I wish we spent more time together," that's a different starter. And John Gottman will talk about harsh startups. But recently, and just very recently, I talk about my responsibility as the sender, as the speaker. But I also have a responsibility as the receiver. You see, I can use a filter and filter out the contempt. I can take this thing that sounds bad. I can take this thing that sounds scary. I can take this thing that I've misinterpreted, and I can run it through a filter, and I can focus on not what does it actually sound like, but what are they really saying? Not what did they say exactly, and not how did they say it exactly, but based on what they said, what are they asking for? You see, regardless of how it was said, regardless of how it sounded, they've still said something about identifying a need. They're trying to tell me something was bothering them, and they're basically asking for me to do something to help them meet that need. Now, it's true that if it's not done right, it's not done carefully, it can sound like a monster crawling around in your relationship attic. But if we take it out of our pocket, and we look at it carefully, and we listen to it carefully, and we put it in its proper contact, the scary noise that sounds like it's something bad is only bad because of the way we heard it, the way we interpreted it, and the way we reacted to it. Don't let the things that sound like one thing be interpreted for something that they're not. Make sure that when you hear a noise, when you hear a scary noise, number one, make sure it's not just a noise you've been carrying around with you in your pocket and you've let it get into your attic. And number two, make sure that when you hear these scary noises, You decide to run them through your filter and decide, is it as scary as it sounds, or does it just sound like something that it's not?